There we go.
Go ahead, Sluggo.
All right. Hello, everybody. I got the recording says it's paused, Mike. Can you unpause the recording? We are live, but you're recording.
No, go ahead. Just go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, you got us recording?
We're recording.
Hey, everybody. This is Harvey Sluggo Wasserman. This is the 142nd or third Green Grassroots Emergency Election Protection. Hey, everybody. We'll start that again. Hey, everybody. This is Harvey Sluggo Wasserman. We're back for the 143rd Green Grassroots Emergency Election Protection Coalition Zoom call. I guess today is probably the hottest day in the history of the human presence on the earth. They seem to be every day seems to be the next hotter day. I'm in New Jersey and it's hot. I wish I was where my background has me, but I'm not. We have a very full agenda today with a lot of really terrifying things going on in the world, in addition to the incredibly hot temperatures we're dealing with. We're also dealing with a global nuclear crisis at Zaporizhzhia, and we're honored with Howie Hawkins from the Green Party who's going to talk about that in the second hour. We'll also be joined by Linda Gunter, one of the great experts. The danger at Zaporizhzhia cannot be overstated. So we will get to that in the second hour. The absurdity of politics in Ohio continues to also be impossible to overstate. We have had the former Speaker of the House, and we're going to have Rachel Coyle on with us to talk about this. The former Speaker of the House has entered a federal weight loss program at one of the penitentiaries where he's been sentenced for 20 years, and we'll talk about that with Rachel. A lot of other stuff coming from Ohio, especially an attempt to essentially destroy the referendum process in Ohio, which is very, very serious. We want to talk about Julian Assange and the Evan Gershkovich, who is being held in Russia, and the contrast between their programs. We talk about the contrast between the attention that's being paid to them, let's put it that way. I want to mention Jamie Raskin, who's made a major decision. We want to have a discussion of the weapons being used in Ukraine, which is a very big deal. And also, Mike Hirsch is going to fill us in on an attempt to cut the military budget, which would be a welcome thing, not only for the planet, but for all humankind. And we want to scold the DOJ for fighting this youth suit to protect the environment. In the second hour, 6 o'clock Eastern, 3 o'clock Pacific, we're going to dive into Zaporizhzhia and the million tons of radioactive water that are sitting by the Pacific Ocean at Fukushima, which is absolutely terrifying. Pick your poison. I want to mention something about Oliver Stone and his horrendous movie. And we are hopefully going to be joined by Dr. Lisa Nagy, who's going to explain to us some of the realities of the radioactive insanity that they want to put on the highways in Florida. So we have a very, very big, full agenda. We've got Carl Grossman with us, our great anti-nuclear hero. As I mentioned, Howie Hawkins, the previous presidential nominee for the Green Party. And I believe in the next week or two, we're going to have the current frontrunner for the Green Party presidential nomination, which is Cornel. That's Cornel with one L West, who will be joining us hopefully in the next week or two. So Rachel Coyle, we'll go to you. Then we'll get to Ruth Strauss, who's having a meltdown on the Supreme Court. I understand that Clarence Thomas is coming out to California for a fundraiser, Ruth. So you'll be there and you'll tell us all about it. Let's start with Rachel Coyle in Ohio. Usually our segment in Ohio can be subtitled, "You Can't Make This Stuff Up." So Rachel, tell us what they're doing to gut the referendum process in Ohio, which is also going on in Florida, by the way. This is really of major import to our democracy, or what's left of it. And go ahead, give us the bad news from Ohio.
Sure. So I'll start with some good news. Ohioans gathered over 700,000 signatures in just 12 weeks for abortion rights, to put abortion rights on the ballot this fall. And that is very, very exciting news. We only need about 400,000 valid ones in order to get on the ballot. So looking very good there. But of course, they can't make it easy on us. And so there is an attempt now to make it nearly impossible for Ohioans to even put things on the ballot. And once they get on the ballot, nearly impossible to pass them. And so that is issue one in Ohio. It would not only make it so that we have to get 60% of the vote instead of the current 50% plus one in order to win. It would also mean that going forward, anyone who wants to collect signatures to put something on the ballot would need to get thousands and thousands more from all 88 Ohio counties, which is going to be pretty much impossible to do unless you are paid, which, our grassroots folks don't have the money to pay canvassers. So it really would be killing our citizen ballot initiative process in Ohio. So we've got a lot of things that we need help with, mostly just letting people know that this election is even happening, because they set it on August 8th, which is technically illegal in Ohio now. We aren't allowed to have August elections anymore for anything other than local financial crises, which this is not. So it's an illegal election, and they just said it recently, and most people don't even know it's happening. So a huge piece of this is letting people even know that there is an August election, and that all they need to do is show up and vote on one. There's only one thing on the ballot, which is issue one. So I'm going to put something in the chat here, and it's literally just a way for anyone, no matter where you are, to make calls, send texts, write postcards to help us let people know that issue one is happening and that we need them to vote no. Another thing you can do is, today is the last day to register to vote or update your registration in Ohio, if you want to participate in that August election. So you can just, if you live in Ohio or know someone who does, make sure they check. And then early voting starts tomorrow, so you don't have to wait until August 8th to vote no. You can go and vote literally anytime between now and August 8th, and then get everyone else out to vote.
Let me ask you an obvious question.
Sure.
Will the ballot initiative that would require all ballot initiatives to pass with a 60% vote be required to get a 60% vote to pass?
No, it would not. If it passes on August 8th with 50% plus one, it will become Ohio's law.
It's just staggering. I think they put something in the air or the water in Ohio that is just, beyond poison. So we have on August 8th up until August 8th, a referendum that would require all future referenda to pass with a 60% vote. But this particular referendum only requires a 50% vote to pass.
That is correct.
But I assume this is going to be challenged in court.
There were some lawsuits, but the Ohio Supreme Court, which is also controlled by Republicans, decided that they're going to let the August 8th election go forward. They allowed the ballot initiative to go forward, issue one, with what a lot of people argue is really biased language. So, for example, it says that it would elevate the standards to get onto Ohio's constitution, and obviously elevate has a really positive connotation. So things like that were really controversial. So basically the number one thing we can do is just let people know what issue one is, that it's happening at all, and that we need them to vote no.
Absolutely insane. And in the meantime, you're gathering signatures for a referendum on abortion. Tell us exactly what that referendum would do, please.
Yes, so it would literally I actually have the language, it's only 1 page long. It would restore abortion rights, Roe, in Ohio. And it's nothing extreme, it would even allow abortion to be banned after viability, just like Roe did. They're making all these wild arguments that it secretly would impact parental rights or transgender youth care. Absolutely none of that is in there at all. It would literally just restore abortion rights in Ohio. Let me put the language in here. We just turned in the signatures for that, which is very exciting. We're probably going to get on the ballot. The problem is that the polling is all showing it's winning in Ohio around 59%. And if issue 1 passes, we would need 60%. So they are literally moving the goalpost because they can see abortion rights potentially winning this November.
Are there any polls on issue 1?
Yes. The last poll that came out showed that a lot of people don't know what it is, but the people who do are about 50-50. So there definitely needs to be more information spread, more, because there's a very persuasive group of people who are just outright lying, saying that voting yes is how you defend the Constitution from special interest groups, but actually voting no is how you defend the Constitution from special interest groups, because voting yes would mean that only people who have the billions of dollars to go into every county would be able to get on the ballot. So it's a very big like messaging back and forth happening here.
Unbelievable. Wendy Lederman, you had a similar situation in Florida with the referendum, right? Can you talk about that very quickly, please?
Sure, thank you. And Rachel, it was great to see you. Very similar, like we're sister states, we really are. So yeah, we actually, and everything that Rachel is saying, I've seen it happen here. Like she's really accurate with, and it's like playbook, the way that they try to convince people that the supermajority is to protect the Constitution from like too many people trying to amend it. Here, we actually did have a 60% pass, like approved by the voters, and now they're going for 67%. We have the abortion petition going. I'm working on it as a paid petitioner. And it's same thing. I mean, everything you said about needing paid petitioners, like I'm working on a right to clean water as well, and it's not paid. And we have like 1/10 of the amount that we'll need. We need over 900,000. So really we have to go over 1 million to make sure that we have the validity there. I can quickly read, because again, it's like the same. So here we have no law shall prohibit, penalize, delay, or restrict abortion before viability or when necessary to protect the patient's health and as determined by patient's healthcare provider. This amendment does not change the legislature's constitutional authority to require notification to a parent or guardian before a minor has an abortion. That's the summary. What I was telling Harvey earlier, and I'm really glad to hear that you're doing well with it in Ohio, we reached 100,000 really quickly, and it's doing well. I guess maybe a little bit farther, like Orlando's really progressive, but I've been going out in like Broward County, which was always blue and typically very liberal and progressive. And I really can't explain the pushback that I'm seeing. I've worked many petition campaigns as a professional petitioner, the 2 marijuana ones, I mean, all kinds. And people are, I mean, even people that would be progressive and liberal on other issues, like, are like, I keep hearing I'm a Christian, and people don't understand that it's to protect the woman's health. Like if it's that something's happened to the pregnancy, it's not viable and it's threatening her life, the doctor is afraid of going to jail. And a lot of people don't understand that, or little girls that were involuntarily impregnated or forced to carry, like a 10-year-old in Texas. It's going to keep happening here. But I've been called a baby killer. I've been told that I should have been aborted. Somebody tried to run me over with their shopping cart, and this is all within like 2 weeks. So it's been pretty intense, just on like a mental and spiritual level, like seeing the transformation of my home state happening. But I mean, I'm still getting a lot of support. I'm still confident with it, but it's just overall, I'm seeing that Florida is becoming kind of an incubator for fascism. And I'm just really glad to hear that other states are not receiving DeSantis's message as well as he would like, because everyone's kind of migrating here and the progressives are leaving Florida, and we really need them to stay and push back. So just it's interesting times. There's an old Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times, and we sure are. So
well, I want to know the progressives who are leaving Florida, where are they going?
I mean, well, I was on a call with someone in California recently, and they're like, well, I'm from California, I don't know any Republicans. So like, I don't really know, or they're just hiding. I don't know, but we still have some.
Okay, we're gonna Eric Lazarus, you have a hand. Eric, you can get unmuted here. We have 57 people on the call. I do want to mention while we're talking about this that something really very rare happened. in Ohio, the Speaker of the Ohio House, Larry Householder, he's basically a walking Thomas Nast cartoon about as corrupt and evil as you can get. Did take a $61 million bribe to put a bailout for the nuclear plants in Ohio, plus 2 coal burners, one of which wasn't even in Ohio. And he got outed by the FBI. Somebody actually did their job at the FBI. Giant scandal ensued. And Larry Householder has been sentenced to 20 years in prison and actually did not get bail. I mean, he's in prison right now. I don't know the last time this happened. I wish they'd clear out space for the rest of the Ohio legislature, but this is a big breakthrough in legislative jurisprudence. Rachel, what kind of impact has that had on the state of Ohio, Larry Householder going to jail?
It is really nice to see somebody finally held accountable, because we've had lots of these level of scandals the last couple of years. So it was the former House Speaker, like you said, got 20 years, which was the maximum. We'll see how much he serves, but it's still, they took him immediately into custody, just wild. And the former chairman of the Ohio Republican Party also got sentenced to what I believe is 5 years. And they were just 2 of the people arrested, Republicans arrested in this massive scandal that is still being paid for. That's the unfortunate part, is they used all this bribery money to elect all these people who then passed this bill to bail out Ohio's energy utility companies, and are now ratepayers are still paying the extra amount in their monthly electric or energy bills because they didn't repeal this. So there's some accountability happening for the individuals at the top, but the rest of us are still dealing with the problems at the bottom. So we're hoping that it leads to accountability more, that this isn't just the end with Larry Householder.
They also killed Ohio had a very good energy efficiency program, which they've gutted as well. I mean, but the idea that Larry Householder would be in prison is pretty amazing, actually. So we'll take our I hate to have a victory be when somebody goes to jail. I mean, it's a very painful situation, obviously, for him and his family. But boy, if anybody deserved it, he certainly did. Eric Lazarus, you've had your hand up, Eric.
Hey, just a really quick point on something happened, while I was canvassing in Philadelphia that I never would have expected. When people say I'm Christian, I'm not pro-choice, following up with, do you really want the government to decide, or would you still want it to be, even if you would discourage abortion, would you still? All but one of the people shifted to pro-choice merely with one more question. So I just wanted to throw that out to you, given what Wendy had just said. Thanks so much.
Well, Wendy, there's a hint for you. Ask them if they want the government control. And of course, you've got all those Jewish people down there in the Jewish religion. The fetus is not considered human until it graduates from medical school. So, as you know, that really throws a different light on it. Wendy, what were you going to say?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, no, I say that line all the time, and that'll be sometimes part of my pitch, which varies. But it's like, it'll allow voters the right to decide if women have the right to choose and their doctor instead of the government. And I have had quite a few pro-life people that do understand the implications, and they'll even sign, even though they're not for abortion, but they're not extremist in either way. But I mean, that's definitely a point that people take, especially on the conservative side of, it's just not like government, get out of my business, but it's just such an emotional, like we've seen this a lot, like, especially since the Trump presidency, is that people get so emotive in like their thinking and where they're coming from. So it's like, it takes a lot, and you only have a few seconds to kind of get their attention. So, it's a very fluid thing, and I'm seeing all different parts of the spectrum, but it's a good point. And I do talk about it all the time, and a lot of people agree with it. The ones that get it and are willing to get past their emotions to think logically. Thanks.
So Wendy, you're now in the process of out gathering signatures. Is that right?
Yeah, going out and it's hot. Let me tell you, there's a new kind of heat that's happening in Florida. Just to talk about climate change, I've never experienced like this kind of heat. So I think that has part to it too, where people just don't want to like stop because they're sweating. But yeah, that's
Well, I hope you're wearing a hat, a sombrero, something to keep the sun off your head. But that's mind-boggling. So, Rachel, if well, I guess they already require 60% in Florida. Is that right? So,
yeah.
Rachel, if this Unit 1 passes here, to protect abortion rights in Ohio is going to require 60%.
It would, yes. And that actually is what's getting the most attention. But the scariest part to me is that we would then have to collect signatures, thousands of signatures from all 88 counties, which currently you only need from 44, which is still very hard to do if you're just a grassroots group. So 88 is just unfathomable. So that one's not getting as much attention, but it is probably, to me, as an organizer, the scarier piece of this.
Boy, I think it's very clear that the right wing in this country, above all, hates democracy. I mean, whatever their issues are, and that was Adolf Hitler's primary target as well, right up there with the Jews, was democracy. And here we are. I want to welcome David Saltman to the call. Len Finerman, good to see you guys. We've got 60 callers. I want to give Ruth Strauss. You said you had some news on the Supreme Court. Is there anyone else who want to talk about Ohio? Rachel, is there anything in addition before we give it to Ruth that you want to mention here of what's going on in Ohio?
Only other thing is I'll put a toolkit in the chat. We had our big budget pass and it was cruel, but our activism got a lot of the worst stuff out. So I just want to show folks what their activism actually accomplished. So there's a list of wins and losses, but the wins list is pretty long. So I'll put that in there for folks to look through if they're interested.
Okay. And I got to say, we have women with us from the two most, I think they're the most problematic states going on. I mean, it's really astounding. I guess you got thrown in Texas. But I mean, and having lived so much of my life in Ohio, it's just really mind-boggling to hear what's going on there. And I've spent some time in Florida too. Justin LeBlanc, did you want to raise something, Justin? Go ahead here. We'll unmute you. Just for Ohio or Florida.
This is more we can discuss in the next hour, but the thing that I wanted to bring up for energy was the solar energy industry of America has a map that shows large solar projects going in across the country, and Ohio seems to be one of the champions for all of that. So the people actually do care about safe energy for the people.
Well, the other thing about energy in Ohio, we're going to have a really intense thing in the second hour, especially because of what's going on at Zaporizhzhia. But Ohio, the north coast of Ohio, the farmland along the lake is just perfect for wind power. And one sentence in the Ohio Code has prevented more than $4 billion worth of wind development in northern Ohio. It's beyond criminal, and they've managed to keep the windmills out of the lake too. But if you look at a wind map of the world, Lake Erie is actually one of the most intense wind zones in the world. But offshore wind within the last month has been given a green light finally off Martha's Vineyard and off New Jersey. So there have been some breakthroughs here with wind power. And we'll definitely talk about that as we will also revisit Oliver Stone's ridiculously miserable film on nuclear, but we'll get to that in the second hour. Thank you for raising that, Justin, and raise it again. Ruth Strauss, you want to give us your windmill here on the Supreme Court?
Yes, and you just made me think of a wonderful quote that was given to me by one of my African-American transplant patients years ago. And she said, I was complaining about something about administration. And she goes, oh, girl, the devil, he stays busy. So anyway, Uh, you're going to have to compete, Wendy, for fascism awards with your neighbor, Tennessee. I heard this on Amy Goodman, nowhere else. Now, you can bet I'm going to be listening tonight to see if it's covered anywhere else. Okay, so Tennessee wanted to ban gender affirming care. The state court said that they did an injunction. The circuit court has overturned that, and they're suing. They've got the state attorney general is suing Vanderbilt University and some others under the concept of civil investigative demand, which I've never heard of. But since they couldn't really go after them because of HIPAA, although this is effectively it, they are accusing Vanderbilt of Medicaid fraud and insurance fraud, and therefore they are asking for all the personal records of people who have gotten gender affirming and the doctors who have gotten gender affirming care, their emails, their complete medical charts. And when Vanderbilt asked for redaction, they were not granted it. And so now it's in the Sixth Circuit Court, which has said it's okay for them to demand all these things. You know where it's going. It's going to go to SCOTUS, and God knows what they're going to do there. But, you know, between that, affirmative action, and you can't use race when you're describing the Tulsa massacre, you know, fascism is here, and Wendy's right. So I just wanted people to know that. I learned this by calling Vanderbilt because I was just outraged. I mean, they are having to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on this in legal phase that could go to medical research, scholarship for underprivileged people, capital expenditure. It's kind of expensive to run a medical school. So I wanted to bring that up because it is, like people say, and I'm going to finish, drinking out of a fire hose of how many bad things are going on right now with SCOTUS. So thank you.
Well, I will say that, you know, I make a point of watching the news. I go flip from Fox to CNN to MSNBC and then to Wimbledon, but that's a different story. But there is a lot of talk now on the Hill about dealing with corruption at the Supreme Court. And, you know, Clarence Thomas has really led the way on this. And but, you know, John Roberts has been no piker on taking illegal whatever. And so we will see how this develops. But I think the pressure on the Supreme Court will be very interesting to follow over the coming years. And let's see what they do with this particular case. Thank you for that, Ruth. I want to, speaking of the media now, I do want to talk briefly. We have Vinny DeStefano with us. I sometimes you get just really enraged, and there has been a lot of very sanctimonious coverage of the Russian imprisonment of Evan Gershkovich, the Wall Street Journal reporter that Putin has thrown in jail. He's been in 100 days. That was the most recent hook. And I'm hearing these people pompously talk about press freedom, and nobody's mentioning Julian Assange, which is, you know, the exact analogy. Putin wants to arrest this kid in Russia, and we're all up hot and bothered about it. And then here's Julian Assange that we want to bring back and kill him. Vinny DeStefano, what is the latest with Julian Assange, please?
Well, Julian Assange, as you know, there was one judge of a 3-judge panel who issued a 3-page denial of the appeal against extradition. The appeal was over 100 pages of detailed legal arguments showing why it is absolutely illegal for Britain to extradite Assange because he is in threat of danger of losing his life, of being tortured, and also because it is a political extradition on the face of it. But the judge issued his 3-page report by himself, and he basically said, you wrote too much and it was too difficult to read, so I'm just going to say no. I know that sounds ridiculous, But if we were to bring Kafka back from the dead, he would look at this case, and if you ask him to describe it, he'd say, "I'm sorry, it's too Kafkaesque even for me." Now,
who said Kafka even died? I mean, when did that?
Yeah. Well, he's alive and living in the British court system. The issue of Evan Gershkovich is unique in that this is a reporter who was in a war zone in the Russian in Russia. So it's very, very different from Julian, who has spent a total of 4 days in the United States decades ago, who is not a U.S. citizen, but is being tried for treason. That's a neat hat trick that I cannot figure out. But Harvey, you're absolutely right. The hypocrisy of Joe Biden getting up at the White House Correspondents' Dinner and saying, journalism is not a crime, unless you're Julian Assange, and then it is. Because the difference with Julian and again, Evan, and we stand in solidarity with Evan Gershkovich. We don't believe he should be prosecuted any more than we believe Julian. But there is a huge chasm between the two of them, as is there is huge chasm between Donald Trump and Julian, because both Donald Trump and Julian are being tried with the Byzantine 1917 Espionage Act. And as odious it is to say, we stand against the prosecution of Donald Trump on those, if you'll excuse the pun, trumped up charges. And you can charge him for a lot of things, but using the Espionage Act is horrible. This act should simply be repealed because at its core, whether you're Evan Gershkovich or you're Julian Assange or you're anybody else, it is a law that is targeting journalism, but more importantly, it is targeting the concept of dissent. If you don't go along with right now the Democratic Party line, whether it's on the war in Ukraine or vaccinations or anything else, you are suspect. And the beautiful thing about the First Amendment is you have the absolute and utter right to be wrong. When we have thought police determining who's right and who's wrong, we're in a lot of trouble. But you have to remember that Julian is being prosecuted for telling us the truth about war crimes committed in our name and our dollar. And what Evan is being charged with is passing on the movement of Russian troops in Russia, which could be aiding and abetting the enemy. Now, I believe those are trumped up charges, but I also believe it is quantitatively different than what we are looking at with Julian. Julian, again, is being tried for having the temerity to share with the American public the truth. And he uses, and you called him out behind me, that was I.F. Stone. Julian uses the documents from the government itself. And I remind you all that all those documents are classified. They belong to us. My good friend John Kiriakou pointed this out to me once. He said, all those classified documents, many of them classified maliciously to hide crimes and misdemeanors, they belong to us. And so Julian was simply sharing with us documents that belong to us that hid crimes, malfeasance, and murder, rising to the level of war crimes committed in our name.
Well, and also you have to remember that the Espionage Act was used against Eugene V. Debs.
Yes.
Giving a speech against a war that ended exactly to the day 3 months after, actually 2 months after he gave the speech, and he was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison where they kept him locked up while he ran for president. But we wouldn't, would never compare Eugene V. Debs to Donald Trump, that's for sure.
My God, no. There is an excellent book that I would recommend to everybody if you'd like to educate yourself on exactly what Harvey said about the 1917 Espionage Act. Kerry Shankman and Ralph Engelman wrote a book, A Century of Repression, the political nature of the Espionage Act. And it is a small but a densely packed book of facts. And make no mistake about it, this is not catching spies. This is about silencing dissent. And in the case of Eugene V. Debs, he was right. He said that World War I was a war crime and we should not participate. And millions of people died in that war for nothing. He was right. History found him right. And yet he was prosecuted and put in jail.
Well, not only was he prosecuted and put in jail, but they took away his right to vote.
Yes.
Eugene V. Debs was born in Terre Haute, Indiana in 1855. And they took, in his 60s, they took away his right to vote. After he died, many years later, the Congress restored it. But at any rate, thank you for that, Vinny.
Yeah. He also got 1 million votes while he was in prison on the socialist ticket.
Sure, well, you know, I'm going to very quickly say that most historians treat Eugene V. Debs and his imprisonment as kind of a sidelight. The reality is that Eugene V. Debs could have been elected president.
Yes.
He ran for Congress. He was alongside Theodore Roosevelt. He was the best known American political figure by far. And when Roosevelt died, he became number one. People loved him. He spoke around the country for 30 years, the millions of people who had heard him speak, and everybody loved him. He was a great speaker, a completely incorruptible, a beautiful human being, and he could have been elected president. Very, very few historians, in fact, I'm the only one I know who goes around saying this, is that Wilson threw Eugene V. Debs in prison for a very good reason, which is to prevent him from going to the White House. They put him in a big house instead of the White House. and that's what that was about. So we'll talk about that. I know that Tatanka knows all about that as well. I thank you for that, Vinny. Does anybody have a question about, I noticed that they've delayed Assange. There was supposed to have been some kind of decision or motion or extradition.
We're waiting on pins and needles to find out what it is. They're trying to resurrect the hacking charge, which has been disproven categorically. I mean, first and foremost, Chelsea Manning had the only documents he's being charged for are the Iraq war logs and the Afghani war logs, not anything else. And Chelsea Manning had access to all those documents based on her clearance. So there was no hacking necessary.
Well, I can't help but think, having been watching the news, that one of the reasons they haven't made a decision to extradite Assange, actually do it, is because of the Gershkovich case. I mean, it's so blatantly obvious that, you know, if we are yelling and screaming about Evan Gershkovich, what are we doing at Julian Assange? I mean, it's ridiculously obvious. And I think that might be one of the reasons they're hesitating. We'll see.
I had a friend of mine who once told me that the only thing you can put a can of worms into once you open it up is a bigger can. And the can of worms we are looking at is the case that Julian's defense will bring to the trial at the Eastern District Court of Virginia. And although this is a neat trick of the 1917 Espionage Act, you cannot present a public good argument. I revealed the drone strikes, as Daniel Hell did, to show that the government was lying to us about the number of civilian casualties. You can't say that. You have a choice. You can either plead guilty, did I do it, or not guilty, I didn't do it. And
okay. All right, we'll see. Eric Lassus has a hand, and then we're going to talk with, we're going to mention Jeremy Raskin and talk with Mike Hirsch. Go ahead, Eric. Eric, did you have a question?
Yes. So, like, what change would you want to have in the Espionage Act besides maybe this public good argument?
Abolishing it.
Get rid of it.
Yeah, I hear you want to abolish it. So you're saying that it's perfectly okay that Trump sell national security secrets to whoever he wants. We don't need
there
to
are plenty of ways you could prosecute him otherwise.
Specific than abolish it? Let's be serious.
Seriously, abolish it.
You don't need the Espionage Act to prosecute Trump for doing what he did. I mean, it's completely...
Okay, so what would still be illegal once you abolish it? Would it be illegal for him to sell national security secrets? I'm really confused what you're talking about.
Well, that would be treason, and that's another crime altogether. And the 1917 Espionage Act doesn't necessarily even deal with that. I mean, it deals in an ancillary fashion, but it's generally crafted and has been crafted since its inception as a way to silence dissent. It didn't go after spies. It went after dissenters. It went after, and this is the first time it's gone after a publisher. Now, Trump taking the documents broke other laws. Using those other laws to prosecute him would be a vastly more prudent way to approach this. But I have to tell you, Eric, I would simply abolish the Espionage Act.
I got it. You would abolish it. I'm saying, what would still remain illegal? Would you have any laws about defense information, or you're saying you'd always have to violate some other law? Go ahead.
It always has to violate some other law, and there are plenty of laws for that. It's just the Espionage Act is like heating a baby bottle with a blowtorch. It does the job, but not too good on the baby bottle.
Or boiling water with a nuclear reactor.
Yes.
Get Dorothy Reich in, and then we'll go to Mike Hirsch to talk about this movement to cut the military budget. Dorothy, go ahead, please. Thank you, Eric.
Okay, so I want to remind us all that you can only commit treason during a time of war. You can't commit treason in peacetime. So, of course, if we didn't have all these borders, we wouldn't have all this espionage. We wouldn't have any need for any of these laws. So I'm a follower of John Lennon. There's no countries. And then it was
you're a John Lennonist. You're a John Lennonist.
Thank you.
Groucho Marxist. Okay. Thank you. Vinny, excellent presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Harvey.
Mike Hirsch. Oh, I want to mention that Jeremy Raskin, who has been on our Zoom calls, the congressperson from Maryland, has been toying with running for the Senate and has decided not to. And I will say that I went through this in 1980. There was a very good progressive congressperson from Connecticut named Toby Moffett. He is heading into his 5th term. And he, against my advice, he decided to run for Senate. Whereas if he'd stayed in the House, he could have been in leadership. I mean, he was headed in that direction. And he ran for Senate and he lost and never got back into the Congress. It was a big loss, Jerry. But so part of me is greatly relieved that Jamie Raskin has decided to stay in the House. I appreciate that. Dorothy, do you still have your hand up, or go ahead? Let's get you unmuted, then we'll go to Mike Hirsch.
Yeah, so the same thing happened with Alan Grayson. He got it into his head to run for Senate. It was his wife to run for his seat. So he ran for Senate, and it's a huge loss to the country. I think Jamie Raskin was not in any shape to be running. He's just lost his son. He's just battled cancer. He needs to just stay in the House and do his job and try to recover from what he's been through.
Well, where it's nice and relaxing in the U.S. House. Okay. Mike Hirsch, thank you, Dorothy, and thank you for that, Vinny. Very, very great. We want to bring up now an issue, a petition that's going around, Mike Hirsch, to cut the military budget. You want to tell us about that?
Thanks, Logo. Yeah, this is a very important vote that's coming down. As everybody on this Zoom probably knows, the Pentagon asks for a certain amount of money, and then the members of Congress load that budget that's already overloaded and bloated with more of these weapons programs and other miscellaneous spending, and we don't know what is even where most of it goes for, neither do they. They cannot pass an audit. So basically, just really to the point, we're asking people to contact their member of the House and tell them to support the amendment that's being proposed by Representatives Barbara Lee and Mark Pocan. It's an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act. And excuse me, bad air here, here in Maryland. I've just put the link into the chat if everybody can look at that. If you can't see that link, go to P4, the number 4, not spelled out, just the number 4, p4da.org, and you can find the Educate Congress area, and that's where you can find all these materials. But it's obviously a lot easier if you can just go to that link. And it has talking points, a phone script, everything that you need to contact your personal member of Congress and get them to agree to co-sponsor and vote yes on the Barbara Lee Mark Pocan amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act. And I'm here for any questions, but I think it's pretty self-explanatory.
Carla Sand has a hand. Carla, let's get you unmuted here. We have 66 people with us. Carla, go ahead.
Yes, I would like to know the timeline on that. When should we get those letters in? Today, tomorrow, next week? Do you have anything? And forget the Senate. Just go to our Congress people. I mean, our House people. Okay.
Two excellent questions, and I'm glad that you mentioned that because I forgot to mention. We expect the vote to be sometime as early as tomorrow. We were thinking that it might even be today, but apparently it's taking them longer to get to that point. But by tomorrow at the latest, to make sure that you beat the vote, you don't want it to get there while they're voting and have them say, oh, well, now we know we should have done that. So thank you, Carla. And also we're focusing on the amendment in the House. We're hoping that there'll be amendments in the Senate the same kind of way, and that we'd be doing the same thing over on the Senate side. But for now, it's just the House.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carla.
Thank you. Put all that in the chat. Thank you for that. Let's hope we can finally get this military budget headed in the right direction, or rather the left direction. And since we're talking about this and we're getting to the top of the hour, one of the things that's been widely debated right now is this idea of sending cluster bombs to Ukraine. And, you know, it is mind-boggling to me. There are three classes of weapons that the United States, and this is not a debate about the war in Ukraine and the Russian invasion. This is the discussion about what are we doing sending these weapons. One is the cluster bombs, which are horrific and can be, I'd like my buddy Dave Saltman to discuss this a little bit. He's been a war correspondent and seen this stuff. One is the cluster bombs. One is the depleted uranium, which is in the shells, which Dave has asked if we have actual documentation that the depleted uranium shells are being used. I think, Tatanka, you know that, the answer to that. And then the other one is the mines, landmines. Barack Obama refused to sign the global treaty banning landmines. I think over 100 countries signed it. I saw some, retired general that I think they have a factory where they produce retired generals for Fox News. And this guy said that, well, we have to have landmines in case North Korea invades South Korea again. Okay, what about when Canada invades the United States? So, I mean, these three classes of weapons are being used over there, and we're giving them. I frankly am horrified by all three. But Dave Saltman, you wanted to talk to us a bit about the cluster bombs in particular. Dave? Wait, I gotta unmute you. Hold on. Wait, Dave. I see your lips moving, but we don't hear you. There you go. Okay.
Okay. Actually, they are not cluster bombs. They're cluster munitions, which is a fine point. But if I used to cover the military, so this stuff has been beaten into me. A cluster bomb is delivered by an airplane. A cluster munition is delivered packed into a 155 millimeter howitzer shell. And what the Ukrainians have now are the 155 millimeter howitzers, but the shells that they're sending over are conventional, which means that they explode when they hit the ground and they dig a big hole. And unless you're standing right in the hole, they don't kill anybody. Put it in words of one syllable. Now, I'm the first. My mother was a pacifist, and I'm the first to say war is a really nasty, piece of work. So if you're opposed to all weaponry and all wars, I get it, and I totally support that idea. And God help us all. If, like my father, who was not a pacifist, you think that, well, when it came to the Nazis, for example, no, I would fight back, then you got to deal with what weapons are you going to use and what are they using. So as far as the Convention Against Cluster Weapons, so anyway, so these are cluster munitions, cluster bomb. When you say that, it actually shows that you don't know what you're talking about. So don't say that anymore. Say, we hate cluster munitions, please. So the cluster munitions, the difference with them is they explode in the air and they distribute the charge over a much wider space. And whether you, and I think that Biden has said something to the effect that, you know, it was a tough decision, but I think it was the right one. Most military strategists would agree with that because this is the only way that we've discovered so far to deal with essentially what is World War I type trench warfare, which is the kind of warfare that's going on between Russia and the Ukraine. They're digging them, the infantries are digging themselves into trenches and, you know, they're lobbing ammunition at the other side. Neither Russia nor the Ukraine nor the United States, nor I think something like 78 other nations have actually signed the convention banning the use of these weapons. There's a lot of other countries that have, but it's by no means a universal. And basically the military strategic decision is, at the end of the day, there's no better way to deal with entrenched infantry troops. Plus, you mentioned minefields. Cluster munitions are basically the only way, at least from a munitions point of view, to clear a minefield. When you drop these cluster munitions into a minefield, all the mines go off because they're set off by the I think each one of these shells contains something like 88 little bombs, little bomblets. So it sets off a lot of mines.
We usually have like a 90-second rule, but this is very informative. We're kind of getting into the weeds here for a second.
Okay, that's good. David, I'm appreciating your technical description here. You also asked me, just to finish up on the trilogy here, about depleted uranium.
Oh, you were right about that. I did check that out. Those are being used to make shells that are fired by tanks, and they're very hot and they're very heavy and they're armor piercing essentially, and they do emit a very low level of radiation, but the real issue is they can kill a tank.
Right, but the uranium, when it hits the tank, and the shell does not actually have an explosive in it, is my understanding. If the shell is made with uranium, it catches fire and it disperses lethal quantities of radiation, which never go away. And so there's our trilogy, folks. That's what the United States is supplying in the war in Ukraine. You can take one side or the other, or take no side, and still here we have this legacy. David, thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. We'll talk about it in a minute. Yes.
Can I just chime in and say that the depleted uranium that is plating the munitions aerosolizes, and it spreads a fine radioactive dust far and wide, and you may say that it's a low level of radioactivity, but no level is safe, and low levels can still trigger cancer and birth defects in children, and as has been seen all over Iraq. So let's not minimize the lethality of these horrific weapons.
Okay, we got you with that, Myra. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. David, again, thank you. It was a great presentation. Much appreciated. Do we have Pam Wilmot on the phone? I do not see her listed here. Pam Wilmot from
No. Evidently, she was waiting for an invitation from you, and for you to tell her that you were scheduling her for today. But in any case, I just wanted to say, as a means of observation, even David hardly referred to depleted uranium, and the fact that depleted uranium is contained in all of those cluster bombs and all of those cluster munitions, and that the media have entirely eliminated the presence of depleted uranium in those cluster bombs and cluster munitions, and the issue of that. What they're now just talking about is cluster bombs and how, they hurt kids when kids find them. They hurt, and as Mila has said so well, they hurt thousands and thousands of people in Iraq. Every time depleted uranium is used in cluster munitions or in other weapons, it causes birth defects, it causes miscarriages, it causes cancer. It is, when you have 88 little bomblets full of depleted uranium, that's a lot of uranium. That's all I had to say.
Well, it's way too much as far as I'm concerned. We're near the top of the hour. I want to tell my listeners that the Progressive Radio Network on the Solartopia Green Power and Wellness show that this Zoom call has gone an hour. It will go another hour. If you want to hear the rest of it, go to www.electionprotection2024.org, and you can pick up the link to the second hour of our conversation here, which we're going to jump deep into the radioactive weeds of nuclear power because of the crisis at Fukushima and at Zaporizhia. Terrifying, for God's sakes. Barbara Wimsatt, you have your hand, and then Stanley Heller. Barbara Wimsatt. Go ahead and unmute you.
Yeah.
There. Go ahead.
We have to talk about not just these weapons, but also ending the war. And I'm just wondering, how is Biden going to get an off-ramp? What would that consist of? Because he needs an off-ramp in order to create peace, which we need very, very desperately. Any thoughts on this?
Boy, I'm sure other people have better ideas than me. So let's move. Barbara, thank you for raising the question of the day. And I don't, they're not even negotiating as far as I can tell, for God's sakes. Stanley Heller. Barbara,
I hope they're doing it. I hope they're doing it behind the scenes, but then we don't know about it, but who knows?
Who knows at this point, right? Stanley Howard, you want to chime in on
that?
Yeah,
I've been reading about these weapons for many years. Heard Doug Rockey talk about depleted uranium. We brought him up to Connecticut. Cluster bombs. At one point, there was 1 million bomblets dropped in Lebanon by the Israelis. It is a horror. On the other hand, we have to talk about what is the situation in Ukraine. And the Russians, how many thousands, tens of thousands of mines did they put in? Did people complain about that? There's a kind of a hypocrisy of just talking about the terrible things the United States is doing. And one has to wonder, as an alternative, to say no to cluster bombs, yes to more F-16s and helicopters that could help these people. It's not that simple. I find pacifism is a mistake as a whole philosophy. Thank you.
Well, it's really a nightmare. Yes, thank you for that, Stanley. John Ryman, and then Wendy and Tatanka. And then we're going to jump into an hour on nukes here.
The people that say, how can Biden be on the off-ramp? I would urge them to ask Ukrainians including Ukrainian socialists like Socialny Ruch, including trade unionists, including feminists and environmentalists, what is their view? Because they are almost never heard, or not almost, they are never heard in the peace movement here in the United States. And they don't want an off-ramp. They don't want to be raped. They don't want to be mutilated. They don't want to be tortured. They don't want to have their environment totally destroyed. They don't want to be invaded. And they don't want more Buchas. They want to fight back. So how about them? I urge you to talk to them, the social movement, and feminists and environmentalists in Ukraine.
Okay, maybe we can do that. The whole thing just makes me sick, but that's no answer. To Wendy and then to Tatanka, thank you for that, John.
Thank you. It's probably not going to be an entirely popular opinion or statement, really. But just want to remind everybody that, NATO has been pushing closer and closer, gathering more momentum. If Ukraine joins NATO, we're automatically in World War III. All right, that's definitely something that we need to consider. And right now, climate change and just poverty are, I think, major priorities that we don't need to be putting aside to send just for more death and destruction. And it was recently come out that back last March, Putin and Zelensky came to some sort of negotiation and peace talk, and they were sitting and there was diplomacy happening. And days later, Boris Johnson went to visit Zelensky, and the next thing you know, they dropped the peace talk, and NATO is like, boom, there, everywhere. And it's just a really irresponsible path to take moving forward if America is just going to not even consider just negotiations, diplomacy. I mean, these are evil words. Meanwhile, people are dying. Like, we're talking about mutilation of people, the death and destruction, possible nuclear fallout from whether it's weapons or accident, which, I mean, honestly, like, if Putin wanted to take out one of the nuclear plants, he could have done it by now. And I'm not saying that to defend him.
We're going to talk about that in a minute with Howie Hawkins, who's got something to inform us about. Thank you for that, Wendy. Much appreciated. Tatanka, Dorothy, and then we'll go to Howie Hawkins. I'm waiting for Lisa Naj to come on. Yeah. I don't know if she's with us. Lisa, if you're with us, raise your hand. Go ahead, Tatanka, please.
Yeah, this is an issue that deserves a whole show in itself and would probably take more than that. You can't really get a scope of it unless you understand the history of the last 75 years that's gone into this. I personally had an experience nearly 50 years ago with a key consultant group of people. I was being recruited to be part of the Ukrainian team 15 years before the wall fell, and they told me exactly dates it would be. And they told me by the year 2020, we would very likely be in war with whoever the president of Russia is. It's a long-term policy. So this has to be understood, I think, as a proxy war between the United States and Russia. Ukraine is, caught in the middle. Like, that's the history of warfare our whole lives. There's no easy solution to this, but people who do talk about it, or Medea Benjamin and Bobby Kennedy Jr. and others, have ideas they're willing to share. But, it's going to be an emotional issue. But I don't think you can understand it by just saying, what do the Ukrainians want? Obviously, what they want is not to continue to be hurt by Putin or anyone else. And so I would suggest that we have a whole show on it and get some people in here who can give us different points of view and have a question and answer.
Absolutely. Let's work to put it together. Everybody has suggestions. We'll definitely do that. I will say, watching the news, that the party line is that from Biden and others is that Ukraine is not yet ready for NATO. I don't know what that means. I mean, they're bringing in Sweden now, although the Turks don't want Sweden, apparently. I have no idea of the politics of NATO, but let's talk about it next week. Absolutely, Tatanka, we will do that. Dorothy Reich, and then we can go to Howie Hawkins.
So I will tell you my most cynical version of what's going on.
Okay.
That they need to make the Ukraine war profitable enough that we don't have to go to war with China.
Well,
Things have settled down about China lately, but you know, if we can't make enough money at Ukraine, then I guess that's our next move.
So your thesis is it's all about cash flow.
Well, you know, we were going to go to war over Taiwan, and then things heated up in Ukraine, and seemed to have backed off. We sent Yellen to China. She made nice with them. Now they're only talking about trade wars. They're not talking about shooting wars anymore.
Okay. All right. That's good.
Of course, you know, there's always the chips in Taiwan that we can't afford to have that chip factory destroyed. Everybody needs that. So it's all not always what it seems. This Ukraine thing is just a money maker for everybody. Look, now they're getting rid of their cluster bombs that they had and that they had nothing to do with. So now they can get rid of those.
All that inventory. Okay.
Yeah, right.
Did you raise your hand again before we go to Howie?
Yeah, just you're not far off the mark. I mean, part of what was revealed to me was it was a wink when everybody was talking about NATO as a defensive force, and you will see it surround Russia with nukes by this 2020 period that I heard about in November of 1976. And the goal was to isolate China, but not necessarily to have peace with China. Anyway, It's a long discussion.
All right, we'll have it next week. So if you want to pull that together, that'd be wonderful. We'll work together on it. Okay, Howie, and we're joined by Linda Pence-Gunter. Hi, Linda. So the one thing that you're not hearing about much, a little bit here and there, which is the most terrifying of all the developments in the Ukraine war, is what's happening in Zaporizhzhia, the nuclear plant, and where there's 6 reactors, the biggest nuclear cluster of nuclear reactors in Europe. And it's terrifying. I'll turn it over to Howie Hawkins. Howie, do you want to tell us what's going on and the attempt to deal with it? And then we'll go to Linda Gunter.
Yeah, I just put in the chat a petition that's urging the UN General Assembly to authorize UN peacekeepers to demilitarize and secure the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant because of this escalating crisis demands international attention. So the link is in the chat, and just a little background how it's escalated. You know, there are 6 nuclear reactors and 5,500 spent fuel rods in the complex. And we've had concerns about safe operations since the Russian military captured the plant in March 2022, began locating troops and heavy military equipment in it, and soon removed the Ukrainian management that had been running it and turned the management over to Rosatom, which is Russia's state-owned nuclear energy corporation. But the crisis radically escalated about a month ago on June 6th, when the Kakhovka Dam, which was under Russian control, was blown up. And the big reservoir went down, and that put in danger the cooling pond that supplies the water to cool the 6 reactors and about 2,000 of those spent fuel rods that are in cooling ponds for storage. So together with the 3,500 spent fuel assemblies in dry cask storage and the 2,000 in the ponds, there are 5,500 fuel rods. And that doesn't count, and that's 2,200 tons of nuclear material. That doesn't even count what's in the reactor cores. So one fear is that the cooling pond dikes will collapse because the internal pressure of the pond is encountered by the reservoir that's now gone. Another concern is that the Dnieper River, which is now not up high enough, will not be able to refill the cooling plant. And it could run out of water within a matter of weeks if there isn't other sources. Now, on June 12th, Ukraine's environmental minister said that wells in the area, water discharged in a channel from a nearby coal plant, and agricultural irrigation channels will be used to keep the water high enough in that cooling pond, and they're trying to do that. But then on June 20th, Ukraine intelligence accused Russia of mining the cooling pond. And then on June 30th, Ukraine intelligence said also that on the 30th, they said Russia had told its management employees to leave the plant by July 5th. That's last Wednesday. And Ukrainian intelligence also said on June 30th that Russia was evacuating the city of Enerhodor, which is where the nuclear workers live, and told any personnel remaining at the plant, who are the regular workers, to blame Ukraine in case of any emergency situations. So when the June 5th deadline for evacuation came, Ukraine intelligence came out again and said there are possible explosives on the roofs of nuke 3 and 4, of 4 reactors 3 and 4. And satellite photos do show there's something up there. Now, Russia, of course, is accusing Ukraine of making this up and planning to blow up the complex with artillery shelling. The International Atomic Energy Agency has 4 inspectors on the site, but while they say they have not seen any evidence of mining, they haven't been able to go to the cooling pond on the roofs of these 2 reactors. So whatever the truth is, with these accusations flying back and forth between Ukraine and Russia, the situation is dire, if only because the cooling pond may run out of water. So the purpose of this petition is to get the UN General Assembly to authorize these peacekeepers to demilitarize and secure the Zaporizhzhia nuclear complex. And the Assembly, the General Assembly, does have this power to bypass the UN Security Council and Russia's veto. It hasn't used that power since 1956, the Suez Crisis. And ironically, it was the US, the USSR, and China that were trying to get a resolution passed to stop the Israelis, the French, and the British from taking over the Suez Canal. They were attacking Egypt. So ironically, the US, the USSR, and China were allied at that time against the French and the British. Different time. But we believe the politics in the General Assembly will align behind this proposal and get support of many of the 35 or so countries that abstained on previous resolutions condemning Russia's full-scale invasion and their annexation of Ukrainian territories. Because they wouldn't be crossing Russia directly, but acting to protect the whole world from a nuclear catastrophe. And if the General Assembly does take this action, it may make Russia feel compelled to agree and withdraw its military so the UN peacekeepers can come in. And this idea actually comes from a Ukrainian. His name is Taras Bilis. He's an historian, a socialist activist, and now a soldier. And he was on a call with some activists here, one of whom is on the call here today. He was in some forest near the front lines. But he's also published an article, and I don't know how he is a soldier and he's writing all these good articles, but I'll put the link to that in there. And it makes a case and discusses the politics in the UN. So I'll put that article in. And so what we're doing is urging you all to sign this petition and then publicize it, your social media, whatever means you have, because this is a crisis. And I believe John Ryman was on that call with Taras Bilis. He may want to add something. And Stanley Heller is part of the group that's promoting this petition. So I'll put that link in the chat, and thanks for listening.
Well, thank you. I want to give it to Linda Gunter, who is the first person I heard correctly pronounce Zaporizhzhia, and who probably knows more about these reactors than anybody. Linda, do you want to add to Howie's fantastic presentation there, Susan?
Well, thank you, Harvey. You look like you might be about to jump into that lovely sea behind you. When you walk backwards, it looks like you're going for a swim. But anyway, back to the serious subject at hand. I mean, I think what this points out, in trying to sort of unravel all the various rumors and accusations back and forth, what this really points to is that the inherent danger of nuclear power as a technology allows for this kind of use of it as a propaganda tool or as a threat and so forth. So whether the Russians or the Ukrainians have mined or wired anything will be very difficult to get at. It's obviously doesn't make much sense for either side. No one can really figure out what would be gained by either side in doing this, given the likely outcome and the prevailing winds. But the reality is that, for us, at least at Beyond Nuclear, this just continues to reinforce the most important message, which is that if this were a wind farm, nobody would be talking about it, and they wouldn't be able to use it, either side, in this strategic way to say, they're going to blow it or they're going to blow it, because the consequences are so dire, as Howie points out, if in fact that happens. And so it's imperative, I think, even as we continue to push for the sort of near-term preventive solutions that might stop it being in the thick of a war, the bigger picture is that it gives us yet more reason to advocate yet more forcefully for an end to the use of nuclear power altogether anywhere. Because whilst a war can certainly enhance the likelihood of some catastrophic outcome, it could still happen on a so-called good day, anytime, anywhere, any place. So as you've talked about a lot in terms of Diablo, Harvey, we have Calvert Cliffs 50 miles away from us. So we're all in this perpetual danger. And it just tells us that, it's the inherent danger of nuclear power that makes it this kind of weapon, not only a physical weapon, but a propaganda weapon as well.
You're muted, Harvey. You gotta unmute.
What we're talking about here is 6 reactors, each of which has a greater internal radioactive burden than Chernobyl did, because Chernobyl was actually relatively new. These reactors have been operating for a while. You also have spent fuel pools, which, if God forbid the spent fuel catches fire, which it very nearly did at Fukushima Unit 4, you're talking about an apocalypse, literally. I mean, these reactors, all this stuff will blow right into Europe and get into the jet stream. Radiation came to the United States from Chernobyl within 10 days, circled the globe at least twice in recognizable cloud form. I mean, the scope of the disaster that we're facing here is literally incomprehensible. And, Howie, the idea that now the UN, it was the Security Council who sent the force into the Suez. In this case, nobody thinks the Security Council will do that at Zaporizhzhia because the Russians are in the Security Council.
No, the UN General Assembly bypassed the Security Council. There's a resolution that the Security Council passed in 1950 called, I think it's called Uniting for Peace. And it allows the General Assembly to overrule the Security Council to send in peacekeepers. That's what they did in the Suez crisis. So it hasn't been since then.
Okay, so it was not. So in this case, again, we would expect that it would have to be the General Assembly that would send in the peacekeepers to Zaporizhzhia.
Right.
Sending in the peacekeepers is the first sane thing that I've heard in this whole war situation. But, John Ryman, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah. First of all, I would like to say, in response to what Linda was saying, some years ago when I was first starting to read up on nuclear energy and the reasons against it, and one of them was, well, it could be a target of a terrorist attack or a war. And I just thought, well, that'll never happen.
And I never thought that.
Well, I'm just telling you myself, and I just dismissed it. And here we are, So I should also say, the people I've talked to in the last week, a couple of people in Ukraine, and a couple of Ukrainians who are here in the United States. And they're all saying, you know, everybody in Ukraine is talking about this and is terrified of what could happen there. And one, he's a physicist, a Ukrainian professor here in the United States, Denis Bondar. He was saying, look, you know, what happened with the Novokakhovka Dam? He said, you know, the seismic sensors have proven that it was some explosion from below the dam. So, and since Russia controlled the dam, it could have been either it was exploded, or he said what's even more terrifying is criminal negligence. And he said in part the dam was designed to release water from both ends, but Russia was only releasing the water from one end. And he said that's a possible reason that the dam collapsed. And he says that's even more terrifying in relation to Zaporizhzhia power plant, because it's Russia that controls it. And it could be just simple criminal negligence on their part that could lead to a disaster. Now, some people say, well, you know, the IAEA says they can't find any evidence of the mining and stuff. Well, there's 4 inspectors for basically a city, an entire city. And they're also, as Howie mentioned, they're barred from going to certain parts of the plant. So these are some of the main points that I would add to what Howie was saying. And I think that regardless of your views on the war, which I think is an imperialist invasion, pure and simple, but even if you don't agree with that, I hope that everybody would agree that we want to prevent a disaster at that power plant. And I don't have a whole lot of faith in the IAEA, one of whose jobs is to promote nuclear energy, but it's certainly better than having Russia be completely in charge of it. So I'm going to post a link to the petition again, and I hope everybody signs it and helps publicize it, sends it around.
Well, I know exactly the group that should be sent in to take over the reactors, and that's Greenpeace. So I'm all for Greenpeace going in there and doing the peacekeeping, along with the Beyond Nuclear and the Green Party. That would be a great trio. Stanley Heller, go ahead. Howie and Linda, thank you very much. And please stay with us. Excellent presentation. Stanley? Are you unmuted? No. I do want to, while we're unmuting him, I do want to mention one other insane nuclear situation, which is that there are literally 1 million tons of radioactive water at Fukushima that they now want to dump into the Pacific Ocean. And, you know, this is simultaneous with Zaporizhzhia. Nobody has any idea what this radioactive liquid would do to the Pacific Ocean. 1 million tons, for God's sakes. So, and they're not even in a war zone. Stanley Howard, go ahead.
Thanks. I work for Promoting Enduring Peace, which is a peace and environmental organization that was formed in 1952. And I just put in a link to a page that we have about this petition, supporting it, and background information and so on. I have more terrifying information. Just today, Dmitry Medvedev, now he's the former president of the Russian Federation. There was a period when Putin was in for a while, then constitutionally he had to be out, then they had Medvedev, then Putin was back in. Anyway, Medvedev is now deputy chairman of Russia's Security Council, so still very important. And he's constantly talking about using nuclear weapons. Well, today he says that Ukraine has shot missiles towards the nuclear power plant in Smolensk, the Russian nuclear power plant in Smolensk, which borders Ukraine. And he says if that is confirmed, he will call for missile strikes against the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plants. I'll put that link in the chat too. So it's It's incredible. It's incredible. And
sure,
this is a very good proposal that could have some legs. There's about 500 signers. We need 500,000. I'm done.
Well, let's do it. I mean, is there any nonpartisan, non-national force in Europe anywhere near Zaporizhzhia physically that is active in dealing with this? Is this all, I guess, since it's a war zone, nobody can go near the place. And they're also, of course, God knows what's happening at Chernobyl. I mean, you know, you had a relatively stable workforce in Chernobyl, and then the Russians went in and terrorized everybody. And then they dug trenches and camped in the radioactive dirt. And who knows what's going on in Chernobyl right now, for God's sakes. But I did want to reemphasize, we do have literally 1 million tons of radioactive liquid in these tanks of Fukushima that the Japanese government wants to dump into the ocean. Isadora Hall is saying she can't get in. I hope people are not having a problem. Howie, go ahead, and then Linda, please.
Yeah, Harvey, there were 3 pacifists that were organized between pacifist groups in Ukraine and the US that tried to go to Zaporizhzhia and observe. And their long-range plan was to be nonviolent protectors. And they got into the Ukrainian side. They didn't get into the across the river to the Russian side. So there's been an effort, but it's been pretty small. The other thing I wanted to mention is it's not only Fukushima where they want to dump radioactive tritium into water. We have that here in New York, where they're decommissioning Indian Point 1 and 2. They got radioactive water, and the decommissioning company, Holtec, wants to dump it in the Hudson River. We got a law passed through the legislature, but the governor has been sitting on it for 3 weeks now. So anybody in New York, contact Hochul and tell her to sign the damn bill.
There's also a whole stash of radioactive water at Pilgrim that they want to dump into Cape Cod Bay. You have to wonder about our species, for God's sake. Linda, go ahead, Linda Gunter.
Yeah, I just wanted to circle back to the Fukushima situation, because in a way it's interesting. You mentioned that these 2 things are happening simultaneously, and in both situations, the IAEA has played a significant role. And unsurprisingly, it was the IAEA that gave the green light. They did this analysis only looking at what would happen if we dumped this into the Pacific, not looking at alternative, what if we stored it on land for longer, what else could be done, or why is there such a rush to get rid of it? And, it's pause for thought, isn't it, that the IAEA, as was mentioned at the beginning, whose mission is to promote nuclear energy, the continued use of nuclear energy around the world. And in fact, Rafael Grossi has been doing exactly that at the COP meeting and elsewhere, continuing to extol the virtues of nuclear power and saying things like, it's not nuclear power that's the problem, it's the war that's the problem. But it's obviously the 2 things together. And so what we actually need is an independent agency that is not in the business of promoting nuclear power, serving as the UN watchdog and regulator in these situations. And the other thing I think to point out, and we're hopefully we'll do some sort of event on this later in the year, is that the dumping of this water at Fukushima, and the reason there's such a rush to do this, is to make this accident disappear. And this is part of a much bigger picture across Japan, an effort to sort of vanish the disaster. So some of the things that have happened already are, the complete downplaying of the rate of thyroid cancers that they're finding, that getting rid of the black, all the nasty optics, getting rid of the black trash bags that are everywhere containing the radioactive waste and redistributing it elsewhere. Now I'm still trying to get to the bottom of exactly how this works, but my Japanese colleagues have told me that they're fudging the numbers on the refugees, that now that they've lifted the the evacuation laws, and you are expected to return back to these far too radioactive places to live, you will no longer then be counted as a refugee, a Fukushima refugee. So these numbers will diminish. And there are just endless examples of this. The Olympics, this was another effort to say, look, everything's fine. We've got the Olympics here. So it's all part of a plan to erase this disaster and say it wasn't really that bad. Nothing much happened. No one died, and we can, the solution to pollution is dilution. So we can dump this in, over the space of, this is going to go on for probably 40 years. This is not 1 million tons all in one day. So this is an ongoing thing, which has had immense amount of opposition from pretty much everywhere except TEPCO, the IAEA, and the Japanese government. And so we keep hearing it's about to happen, it's about to happen. It looks horribly like it will. And as you say, there've been marine scientists who've tried to look at what the implications are. But water is a great mover of things. It's a good distributor of radiation. We've seen it already with the Hague reprocessing facility in France, and they found isotopes from that as far as the Arctic Circle. So we know that this is an excellent way to move radioactive isotopes around, and the Pacific will be a very good vector for that. So there's still time, I guess, to keep the pressure on, but the conflict of interest of the IAEA is really at the heart of this, and I think that's what needs to be got at next.
Unbelievable. I want to introduce another piece of it here. I hope she didn't leave. Dr. Lisa Nagy. Oh, there you are, Lisa. Okay, this is Dr. Lisa Nagy. She practices on Martha's Vineyard, and she is an expert in environmental and health issues. And she's come on with us. She's had tremendous media presence to talk to us about, you can't make this stuff up. The radioactive material in Florida that they want to put on the highways. I mean, just saying that is insane. Lisa, can you tell us about this? It's phytophosphates, right?
Yeah, it's phospho. I always want to say sorghum, but it's phosphogypsum is the name of the material. And, I got called as an expert because they found me on the internet. I've done some stuff on TV on Netflix called Afflicted, talking about other toxic exposures. So they made me into an expert on this, but, to tell you the truth, I had to learn it one evening and present on live TV at 7 a.m. And it was called News Nation. It's a channel that's supposed to be in between, right and left. And it was good to have an opportunity to speak because I got to say some other things about environmental medicine. And I talked about road rage, and I brought in other things that I'm interested in.
Okay.
But I made some comments about what I learned by reading the literature on this byproduct of fertilizer waste. When they make the fertilizer, phosphate industry is chiefly in Florida because that's where they can find this product. And you guys probably know lots more about it than I do, to tell you the truth. But the Chinese have written some articles, and I read a few more articles, today about what they're doing. So the main interesting thing is when they take this byproduct and they take the waste as a sludge or whatever, and they stack it, it takes up a lot of land, whether it's in Florida or China, and it takes up 200 feet high by like a couple of acres. And they have like 20 of those big stacks of dried sludge that's radioactive. And it's got radon and breakdown products of radon in it, but it also has a small fraction of heavy metals. And, there are probably lots of other components of it that I really haven't, discovered and researched. But the main thing is that they wanted to study it in practice for 1 year and then decide whether to continue it, putting it in the roads of the freeways in Florida. So everybody was sort of laughing that sounds ridiculous, but it got put into law on Thursday. And I was just reading an article here that June 30th it happened. So I guess he might know me now. And I laugh because 3 of the presidential candidates know me personally. And DeSantis.
The radioactive phosphate from the fertilizer industry is now being spread on highways in Florida. Is that
well, what they want to do is consider doing it everywhere in highways in Florida, like they do, I think, in China. And there are a couple other countries that I've forgotten now that do it, but the Chinese have studied it. So they want to get rid of it because it's expensive to do what they're doing now, which is taking up a lot of land. They got to buy the land, then they got to like stick it there, and then it doesn't go away. So what the Chinese wrote about is how to make it palatable and non-toxic to bury it so that you could put it into the soil and leave it there underneath the soil. So, they were saying that there's a way to do that. They didn't actually, the articles I was reading didn't talk about putting it into the cement. So their article is about putting it in cement and using it as a building material to get rid of it. So you put it in buildings that you're making or highways that you're making, you get rid of it by putting it into other things. And so you don't need to take up the land because it's just taking up so much space.
Okay, so basically then they want to mix this phosphate into the highway materials, even though it's radioactive, and put it on the highways.
Right. And so what I said on TV, kind of winging it, was that, because it was live and I had to think quick.
Okay.
The guy would ask me questions and I'd be like, okay, I got to have an answer for this one. So the problem is, well, one, I mentioned the precautionary principle, which you guys, what?
Okay.
Can you hear me? I think, did you say something?
Well, just go ahead and wrap it up because we want to know, are they in fact putting this radioactive material on the highways in Florida? And do they plan?
No, they're doing a study. And the study isn't on human health, I said. The study is on whether it will work in the highway, whether it will be a feasible product that you can drive on and it won't degrade. So what I said was studying it for a year is a joke because radon causes the second greatest.
What did they find out?
You're not going to let me finish, are you?
Go ahead.
So they want to, radon is the second largest common cause of lung cancer. So if you want to study lung cancer in humans, a year isn't going to do it. And what they're going to do is they're going to expose the workers who are putting it into the highway immediately because they're not going to protect them adequately. There's no way to protect people. And I mentioned these radon daughters, which is like breakdown products that are radioactive. And the daughters, these are little breakdown products, get into dust. And I presumed the workers can inhale the dust.
Right.
And that would cause lung cancer even more readily because you would have a mechanism, not just that it's in the air, like it's in your home as a breakdown product from rock, but it is in dust particles that you could inhale. And then they would be inside the person. So they're just trying to study it for the roads. They don't really care about the human health at all. And I implied that Florida would not be the place that would be concerned about that aspect. And I didn't mention anybody's name in particular or any political party. And I just said at the end that it's mostly a financial concern. And then boom, it clicked off. So the main thing is it's a way to save money. And I guess this article here, talking about what happened on Thursday, says that they gave fertilizer company gave $25,000 at a fundraiser, I think for DeSantis. And obviously there's a motivation to do this just to dispose of it in a way that is less expensive.
Thank you, Lisa.
Hey, Sluggo, I wanted to hear what she had to say about the presidential candidates who know her now. And then also, I think we have a bunch of questions for her because this is a very important issue for everybody in Florida.
Well, everybody everywhere. The radon daughters, by the way, are polonium, bismuth, and lead. When radon breaks down, that's what they turn into. And polonium is a murderous a radon emitter. It's actually an alpha emitter. And polonium is actually one of the killing ingredients in cigarettes because when they fertilize tobacco, polonium is in with the phosphates, and it is an alpha particle, two protons, two neutrons, guaranteed if it gets in your lung to cause lung cancer. It's part of plutonium as well. Lisa, you're quite brilliant, and we really appreciate it. Which are the three presidential candidates that you know? Mike wants to know.
Well, but DeSantis probably knows me from this News Nation piece that I did because somebody probably showed it to him. But, RFK I watched one of his videos today. You know, he's really quite brilliant and good at litigation on toxic exposure. The problem is he got in bed, you know, with some Republican issues that I don't agree with. And
the border.
What?
The border.
Okay.
He's big on closing the
wait.
border now. Sorry to
Okay.
interrupt.
And what was, so it's DeSantis, RFK, and who's the other one?
Well, let me just say that Robert F. Kennedy had a leak and had a moldy house, and his wife committed suicide over it.
Okay.
And I know them personally and used to have to call her back at the house and that kind of thing. So I've been mentioning that publicly because we were acquaintances, and she died from mold exposure and postural tachycardia, which is the fast heartbeat damage that you get from mold, from COVID, from Wi-Fi due to voltage gated calcium channel injury. So that's pretty interesting. And Deborah Davis, who you know, is pretty close with RFK and the Children's Defense Fund. So it's interesting how he's getting more traction. I don't know how much international experience he has in running the world, though. And then the, who else is, and Biden wrote me a letter thanking me for my work on the burn pits. And his son, you know, was deployed and got a brain tumor. And obviously I helped to raise about 100 million in Congress for toxic exposure research in veterans. So I showed a video, it went well. And I work in that area of toxic exposure, in many different people. Okay.
Thank you for your work on this radioactive issue, Lisa. It's very important. And also thank you for putting me up in your little cabin on Martha's Vineyard.
My chicken coop.
I hope I did try and clean it up. I hope you have me back sometime.
I just bought a trailer last night. You want to come? I have now a really nice trailer you can live in.
Okay, I'll do that. I'll use your bike as well. Thank you, Lisa. Tatanka Brick. Oh, actually, Lynn, Tatanka, if you wait, Lynn Feinerman had her hand up first, and then Tatanka, and then Wendy. Thank you, Lisa. You're a real treasure. If you want to stay with us, please do. Lynn Feinerman, go ahead. Lynn.
This is a commentary on all of the nuclear issues, but with particular regard to all of the poisoning of the waters, oceans, rivers, the Nahuatl, the ancient Nahuatl, an indigenous American community from Mexico up into the United States, said that the end of the era that we are all living in would be signaled and symbolized and literally characterized by Atlachinoli, which means burning water.
Wow. Well, of course, the Cuyahoga caught fire in 1969, so that was a start. Thank you for that. Tatanka?
Yeah, I wasn't going to mention this, but in 1987, one of the visions I had, couldn't make sense of it except through that prophecy, was the earth, seeing the earth with huge water meeting huge fire. And then anyway, what I wanted to say is thank you for this discussion. Thank you, Hal, you, Linda, Lisa, Wendy. This, looking at the playbook and the shell game and make it go away, and the entire industrial age of being at total war with nature, don't look at natural solutions, and to max the extractive industries right now, and where it's already financially, economically, health-wise, a complete disaster, bury it, make it go away, and continue it if we can, right? Open the nuclear power plants, because they're looking at debt. So I like that thing about the shell game. The war is the problem. Don't look at nuclear. In Oliver Stone's movie, it's not nuclear the problem, it's coal. It's just look over there. Don't look at what we're doing. Like they said, the ocean with Fukushima, the ocean can absorb that. That's just a tiny amount. You had the guy shilling for Oliver Stone saying, well, we used to think that humans didn't have any control over radiation, but now we know better. We humans can transmute radiation, something to that effect. So that's what's happening. And they're masters of distraction at every level. And it's all this conclusion of war against the earth, which is war against our own bodies, and ignore all the indigenous wisdom. When I just have to say, ever since Eisenhower years, well, actually before, there's been 100-year history of people following Tesla with inventions of zero-point energy, you know, the magnetics and the movement around the earth, because energy comes from moving water. That's why we have dams. Moving wind, that's why we have wind. Move the light from the sun, you know, that's why we have solar. But the magnetics of the earth, it's the only thing that basically has no extractive consequence. And we could have had that energy. We didn't even really need the oil wars. And now what's being unveiled with this ET exposure and with the new office in the Congress on all the military information that has to be turned over starting months ago, but completing in 11 months. It was a bill signed in December that Danny Sheehan wrote. We do know now that there has been the reverse engineering has happened of the ET vehicles, which is the same kind of thing that humans not knowing that, I don't think, were working on with their inventions, where with very little or no energy input, you can get energy output, which in standard physics, you can't do that. So you don't even look there, right? That's impossible in the old physics. Not in quantum physics, but in the old physics. So it's still, you know, you don't look over there. That's impossible. Look over here. And meanwhile, this whole game of the playbook, the shell game, making it go away and continuing the extractive, including the wars, you know, which is, you know, when we want to cut the military budget. Anyway, we'll go there next week. Thank you. Wendy.
Okay, thank you. Myra, you had a hand. Did you want to say something, Myra, or did you take your hand down? Also, Linda, are you still with us? Linda Hance Gunter, are you still with us? Myra, did you say something, or did you take your hand down? Okay, Wendy, you wanted to say something? Thank you for that, Tatanka.
Hey, sorry, Harvey.
Oh,
sorry, Wendy. I did take my hand down. I found some really interesting information about radioactive fertilizer on the EPA site, Lisa. So I'm kind of trying to do a quick study on it myself, and what I'm thinking is that they just want to get this stuff out of sight and out of mind, but wouldn't it be less dangerous if it were buried? You know, as long as it's under the ground and seeping out, where the radon isn't nearly as dangerous if it's not indoors, I would imagine. But I appreciate your insight about the radioactive dust, because once inhaled, then it could definitely be deadly. But
Lisa, do you want to respond?
Am I unmuted? I think I'm unmuted.
Yeah.
I think I got an article just like an hour ago that did say that China was looking into deactivating the toxicity, so it could be buried. And I can send the article, but it looks like they may have discovered a way to do it that way, as opposed to distributing it everywhere in the highways or in buildings, to make it less toxic, and then it could be buried.
Well, let's hope from your lips to God's ears, as they say. Howie, did you want to jump in with anything additional here on your UN campaign before we go to Wendy? Wait, I gotta unmute you here. We still have 50 people with us. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would just reiterate, please sign that petition and spread it. Social media, your organizations. Like I think John Ryman said, we got 500 signatures. We should have 500,000. And that's what, you know, we've talked to Russian anti-war activists and Ukrainian people, you know, supporting their country. And that's what they want. So, you know, please do what you can.
Well, it's the first logical solution that I've heard for the Zaporizhzhia thing. I mean, if the United Nations ever had a function, it would be to step into that situation. You know, somebody's got to do something. If it takes the General Assembly, then hopefully the General Assembly will do it. But and the idea that they would use the Suez intervention as a model, that makes a lot of sense. So let's hope somebody comes to their senses somehow, somewhere. Wendy, did you want to say something? I don't know what happened to Linda Pence. Maybe she had to go.
Yeah, she said in the chat she needed to.
Okay. All right. Wendy, go ahead. Anybody else want to chime in here? We'll wrap this up in a minute. Go ahead, Wendy.
Thank you. Yeah, just from on the ground in Florida, I've been studying this for a few months, and it was really disheartening to see that there wasn't a lot of local press until after the bill passed and then it was signed. So just to give some overview. So like you said, it's when the byproduct of the phosphate being turned into fertilizer, and as the phosphate degrades, it turns into radon. And the fertilizer industry is what is destroying about 9,000 miles of waterways in Florida. When you hear the red tide and the blue-green algae, that all comes from the sugar industry and the agriculture. And I mean, we also have a crisis with the seaweed that keeps washing ashore, which there are programs that can turn that into fertilizer and compost. And another law that was just signed had to do with local ordinances. So like local municipalities can't go against these policies or create their own. But like what Tatanka was saying, like there are alternatives to this fertilizer that's killing our waterways, but also phosphate is used in munitions. Florida is the largest producer of like phosphate in the world. And so what is happening now, like you said about the phosphogypsum stacks, like Floridians didn't even know about those. Apparently, like they're these massive, massive stacks, like Linda described, that like they're hidden away and no one talked about them until recently when they're just like, oh God, we don't know what to do with this stuff anymore. And like putting it underground isn't like, they just need to stop producing it and stop doing it for these corporations. And so just one other point I want to make is, so it's to test this out, right? And it says an aggregate in the roads. So it's going to be mixed in all of the roads as it degrades and turns into all these other components as it breaks down, right? So because of the way that the EPA has it regulated, every time that there's a project, they're going to need a permit from the EPA to test this. That's going to set the precedent for other places. And apparently other materials, when you go on the EPA site, have been used as aggregate, and it's hard to find out what they are. But by us doing it in Florida, if they get approved by the EPA, which is just getting more weakened and more weakened and more fragmented, it's going to allow for other places to do it. So this is like really something people need to pay attention to, because literally, like they're going to pave the road with radioactive material, not even just like on the top of it. It's inherently in the materials that they're using, and that's going to run off. Children are going to play on it. Then when we have these massive floods that you hear about, like they're filled with sewage. So my own sick joke to myself is that the sewage floods are going to be glowing. And it's just, really something like maybe everybody could write the EPA and say, please don't approve these permits to study it, because the state of Florida still needs to go through the federal agency. So thanks, Lisa, for the work you're doing on this. And I'm glad everybody's talking about it, because it's really important. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Ruth Strauss. Dr. Ruth. And then Ron Leonard hasn't spoken.
Oh, thank you. Just a quick question for Lisa. If they're putting this stuff, quote unquote, in the ground or under the ground or wherever, can't it get into the water table?
Yeah, I would think so. I'm not really saying that I advocate for that. I'm just saying there was an article that China was studying how to deactivate the toxicity and put it underground. I'm just saying that they are working on that. But what I said was, do we want to follow the Chinese in anything to do with toxicity? Do you remember the benzene in the water? Because I just remembered that spill that occurred, 15 years ago or something, and they poisoned, all the cities downstream. And the idea would be to not do anything that China's doing, I guess. But I said, we don't want to follow their lead. So there are other countries that have researched it. And to tell you the truth, I didn't have the time to research all the other countries and what they're doing with this. I think that it's just a really interesting area when you have an industry producing something that's toxic that nobody thinks about what to do with the waste, and let's just poison the population with it.
Well, I think Julie Weiner has given us the solution, which is mushrooms. We just got to put mushrooms on this stuff, and the mushrooms will take care of it. Everybody has to see the movie Fantastic Fungi, and you'll understand. still have 48 people with us. You people are really fantastic. Ron Leonard hasn't spoken yet. Ron?
So besides this sounding like Highway to Hell, the song, I think really we should use this all as a metaphor. And the metaphor really is that we can accomplish many things at once. We can walk and chew gum. And Harvey's metaphor, of course, is Ohio. Ohio is stopping the federal government from giving them millions, no, billions of dollars for things like solar energy and energy development. There are 10 large solar developments that want to proceed in Ohio, but they're being prevented by stopping the interconnection of those projects, so they can't be built. And the good thing is in Ohio, Harvey, is that there is a bill that they introduced in Ohio, House Bill 197. And House Bill 197 is doing a curious thing. Instead of worrying about big solar systems, and instead of worrying about, these federal as opposed to state powers, they're saying that what we really need is community solar. And community solar says you can put a solar farm here and use the energy there. And by the energy there, it could be on your house. So if your house doesn't have the ability to put a solar system on the roof, you can buy into one of these solar systems, community solar systems, and benefit from the clean energy that it is produced by getting a discount on your electricity bill. So there is a solution at hand. We can do these things. We can accomplish many great things all at once if we stick to the science and make progress on a daily basis.
Wow. And Wendy has put in, thank you. Wendy's put in the chat that DeSatan just vetoed a bill to convert public vehicles to EV, which would have saved $18,000 per vehicle. This guy is, unreal. Does anybody else, by the way, think that Ron DeSantis is gay? I mean, to me, he's like the classic closeted self-hating gay guy. But that's just me. And if anybody else agrees, let me know what you think. Wendy, you would know.
Yeah, he actually has a nickname around here because of like banning all the drag shows that they call him Rhonda Santis. Like this. No, they're having fun.
Help me, Rhonda. But I am convinced that Ron DeSantis is gay. But my gaydar is secondhand, that's for sure. Myra, you had a hand up, Myra? We're almost out of time, folks. So
I did, and it just was because every time I hear about Vanderbilt University, my mind goes to the extraordinary investigative journalism of Eileen Wellsome, who was working for the Albuquerque Journal back in the 1990s. And she broke the news and followed all the clues about the human radiation experiments that were conducted at teaching hospitals around the United States. At Vanderbilt, Vanderbilt had a prenatal clinic in Nashville for primarily helping women who were impoverished, and that was their the way that they were able to get medical care when they were pregnant. And Vanderbilt participated in a couple of different human radiation experiments with the Department of Energy. And I don't even know if it was the Department of Energy at that time. There were some experiments that were conducted before there was the Department of Energy, I believe in the 1940s, and then later ones. And Eileen Wellsome found this one woman who had eaten what she thought was enriched breakfast cereal, and Quaker Oats was involved with this. And it turned out that the cereal that she was given was enriched with enriched uranium. And her fetus, the child that she was carrying, actually saved her life because the child absorbed the radiation, the radioactivity, saved the mother's life, but the child had a very horrible experience, very painful and horrible for the few years that it lived. So when I think of Vanderbilt University, and as I said, there were other teaching hospitals around the country that participated in those ungodly, criminal experiments on human beings.
Well, thank you for that, Myra. As a historian, whenever I hear of Vanderbilt University, I think of Cornelius Vanderbilt, who was really an awful guy, but we won't go into that. Jeffrey Barkdale, very quickly, please, and then we'll go to Tatanka. Thank you for that, Myra. And Lisa, if you want to throw anything in else before we disappear, that would be great. Jeffrey, what do you got?
All that you said, it's just what those people are doing. It's just disgusting. It's like they have no regard. They don't understand what radiation does to the body. How it can slowly kill you. How it's the worst way to die, and all of it. This is why I created, trying to get a resolution past the United Nations for the creation of a new UN observance day. UN observance day called International Radiation Awareness Day, to recognize the dangers of radiation, like all that stuff, like all that, what it could do to the life, dumping the radiation into the sea. If the dome leaks more, where that, where the nuclear testing was, if Diablo Canyon melts down, if any of the nuclear plants explodes from either natural or unnatural or man-made disasters, you get the idea. It's supposed to.
We do get the idea. Thank you for that, Jeffrey. Much appreciated. Thank you. And it is an absolutely terrifying situation. I do want to say that the epitome of denial that I've seen recently, systematic and inexcusable denial of the killing power of radiation, is in Oliver Stone's movie, this Nuclear Now. I don't want to encourage people. In fact, it's boring, it's offensive, it's a piece of garbage. And his denial of the health impacts of radiation in this film are just breathtaking. So keep your breath and don't see it. But I hope to God Oliver Stone comes to his senses, because in terms of a systematic denial, it's absolutely insane. Tatanka, I will give you the last word here. We're at the hour.
Okay.
I want to thank Mike Hirsch for engineering. Lisa Naji, thank you for joining us. Really great. Come back anytime. And go ahead, Tatanka.
Yeah, 1, 2, 3. I second what you said about Oliver Stone's movie. Secondly, on the record, the moment I get off here, I'm going to sign that petition. I hope we will all do it. I'm really happy to hear that somebody has proposed something positive. And third, we do need to talk about complete climate restoration to pre-industrial levels sometime, and some of the solutions about, for instance, sequestering for each cubic meter of concrete, and the world's not going to stop making concrete, you can sequester 1 ton of carbon. And that, together with a biomimicry solution of what happens in with volcanic ash to the coastlines, that it regenerates the algae and the fish and everything. There are solutions there's a lot of decentralized solutions, and then there's a lot of solutions that are immediate action where we could actually, within 10 years, do what we need to do as a species. Thank you.
Well, as we say, from your lips to God's ears. Howie, thank you so much, Howie Hawkins, for being with us. Barbara Wimsatt, did you want to, and Wendy, you as well. Myla, Mike, thanks again for engineering. Barbara, did you want to say something before we go? Barbara Wimsatt. Oh, you got to unmute you. Go ahead.
So I just observed thinking about how we are basically destroying the planet for our future generations. We have no right to do that. Especially the war industry and the amount of money we're spending on weapons is just unconscionable. And we really have to, divert a lot of that to making the planet a livable place.
You got it. Okay. Let's hope. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Nancy. Good to see you. Dr. Lisa, thank you. Thank you, Linda Pence, who's gone. Paul Newman, solar panels. Julie, We will be back next week. We will talk about the war. I do want to say one thing about conspiracy theories I can't resist. Bobby Kennedy, there's a piece in the New York Times listing Bobby Kennedy's conspiracy theories. I happen to know that 2 of them are 100% true. One is his belief that the CIA was involved with the murder of JFK. I mean, come on, you know, that's way beyond conspiracy theory now. And the other is that the Ohio 2004 election was stolen. I guarantee you, I was there and they stole it. So there you go, 2 for 5 ain't bad, and more. Listen, more to come. Have a great week, everybody. I will be back in California next week. Maybe I'll see you, Nancy. And have a great week, everybody. Let's hope that the water is not dumped at Fukushima and we get the UN to deal with Zaporizhia. All right, everybody. No news. Take care.
News, si se puede. And thanks for mentioning more to come, the sister of Mordecai.
We got that. All right. We'll see you. Lisa, say hi to Lucy Benston for me.
Safe travels, Harvey. Bye-bye.
You too, guys.